Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing the book tag that's been going around on BookTube. I'm pretty sure Steph Bohr made this book tag, I think. Okay, so first, a book that deserves more hype. I think Some Mistakes Were Made deserves so much more hype. After I read this, I was in awe at how good it is. It's a second chance childhood friends to lovers, and it's a YA romance. I read a lot of second chance romances, and it's like one of my favorite tropes. I really like that trope, but this one is just done so well. For me, this is like a lot of tabbing. I'm pretty sure this is the first book by this author, Kristen Dwyer, and I'm like shocked. I can't wait until she releases another book because I'm gonna read that immediately. There were so many moments where my heart just felt like it was being squeezed, and that is like one of my favorite things that a book can make me feel, because that's when I'm like, I know I'm in it. And so this one did that for me like so many times, and I would really recommend it. And I never hear anyone talking about it. A book you recommend when asked to give a recommendation. Okay, so I chose two books for this. Daisy Jones and the Six. I would have said The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I was actually thinking about saying that one. Taylor Jenkins Reid writing, like I feel like her writing is good for anyone. Like anyone could read it and enjoy it. Of course not everyone's gonna like it. It's not gonna be everyone's thing. I just feel like it could be so many people's thing, especially if I don't know if they like romance or fantasy. A book like Daisy Jones and the Six is just like your standard literary fiction that people could relate to. Also, I feel like a lot of her books have love in it, but like not in a direct romance type of way, just the ones that I have read. But Daisy Jones and the Six specifically, I think is easier to get into in my experience than The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. There's a show out now, and there's like an actual album for the songs that are in this book, and I think that's really cool. I would definitely talk about that like while recommending it to someone, so maybe I can get them like a little bit more interested and try to like reel them in, you know? The element of music and like a band and putting songs together for an album, it just felt like it was so well researched, and like I learned a lot about it through reading this. The other book that I would give a recommendation to someone, I tried to only stick with one book for most of these questions, but like some of them I just really wanted to give two, because the other one that I would say like to recommend to people is You Deserve Each Other, because this is a romance that I don't see talked to, like it is a pretty popular romance, but I just don't see it like as talked about as other ones, but I think it's really good and different. The main way that I think it's different is that they're already like engaged and they're kind of like working through things again, and I don't read a lot of romances like that where they're just kind of like trying to fix something that feels like it's kind of breaking, you know, and I really like that concept, and it's also really funny, so you know, there's a lot of things to love about this book. A book that everyone loved, but you didn't. A lot of people really loved The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, but I did not really like it that much. I was pretty bored through a lot of it. It didn't really grab my attention, and also I think I was looking for a romance in it that wasn't really there, like to the extent that I thought it was going to be. The story concept itself is cool. I just think that I don't know, I just didn't really like it that much. I mean, it had a lot of really cool descriptors of scenes happening, but I felt like I wasn't really like in it, you know? The book that you tell people is your favorite. Love in Other Words is probably the book that I would tell people is my favorite, even though this is a really hard one because there are like a lot of different genres that I like, and fantasy I also really love. But in like my recent memory of reading, I feel like I found more romances where I'm like, oh, that was my favorite, instead of fantasy to where I don't know, I feel like it's been too long to where I can't claim them is my favorite now because they're just like not fresh enough in my mind. Love in Other Words was the last book that I read that really like blew me. Actually, no, it's not the last book I read that blew me away, but the last book I read where I was like, this is my new favorite. So I would definitely say Love in Other Words. It felt like time didn't even exist when I was reading it. That's probably one of the fastest times I've ever read a book ever. Oh, the next question is a book you read the fastest. Okay, so even though I just said I read Love in Other Words really quickly, I also read Shatter Me, and like I only read until the fourth book of Shatter Me, Restore Me, but I didn't really read their novellas, so I probably should do that one day. I read the Shatter Me series, like the books that I did read of it, I read them so quickly, and it was actually frightening because I was like, I need to take a breather, but I just kept thinking about the world and I was just so entranced with it. The books are so good and they get better and better. These books just kept me on the edge of my seat. They were so good, and the first one I didn't think it was like the best book ever, but it was still good enough to where I like wanted to keep reading it. And even like this one, I remember I was just like reading through it like hooked. So yeah, I don't know what is put in these books. I think the writing is also pretty straightforward, so it's like, I don't know, it's easy to follow along with. There's something about these books that just make them so addictive to read, and it just feels like you can't stop. At least that's how it was in my case, but I've heard other people say the same thing. So a book that's becoming a movie or a TV show. Okay, I hope I'm not wrong about this because I don't feel like looking it up right now. I believe The Inheritance Games is going to be a TV show, and I'm going to be so happy when this comes out because this is such a cool book. It reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Knives Out. It's one of the most fun books ever. It makes me happy, and it, like, strangely enough, gives me like summer vibes, which I don't even remember if this takes place in the summer. So yeah, I cannot wait. I like feel so excited even talking about it because it was so good. A book that I reread the most. Okay, the book that I reread the most lately, or just in the past like year, because I don't really reread books that often, but The Cruel Prince would be the one that I reread the most. I think the reason why I reread this one is, one, for the like romance plot line, because I really like that plot line. I really like Jude and Carden. It's definitely like enemies to lovers, but romance isn't even like the main plot of it. I just like that part of it a lot, and I'm so good with like waiting a long time for things to happen. I love a good slow burn. The other thing that I really just keep going back to this book for is the world, because I really love the world that this takes place in. I think it's such a magical, whimsical feeling, and it makes you feel like you're like in a fairy tale, but it's like really cruel at the same time. Like the world and the characters in it are like very sharp-edged sort of characters, but it's like, it's fun. I don't know. A book from a genre I don't typically read. I don't know exactly, because I feel like this could just be literary fiction, but I feel like it's like that more like poetic type of literary fiction. The Housekeeper and the Professor. It's just very like poetic and beautiful. It's about this old math professor whose memory only lasts 80 minutes, and then a housekeeper comes and takes care of him. She becomes very fond of him, and it's like interesting because you get character development, or at least it feels like it, but his memory only lasts 80 minutes, and so each time that he sees her and her son, who is also a character, every time he sees them, it's like it's his first time seeing them, yet it's like it takes you somewhere. I don't have a physical copy of this book, but I'm glad my mom died. I've never read a memoir autobiography, but it's by Jeanette McCurdy, who played Sam in iCarly, and she's kind of just telling her life story, and it's very eye-opening and like pulls out your heartstrings, but then also makes you laugh. It's a really cool book, and I didn't even think I was gonna like it that much, like as much as I did. I listened to it as an audiobook, and she actually narrates it herself, and it was really good. That's an audiobook where I just wish I could find more just like that, because I feel like I wouldn't like every single book that's that genre like as much as that one, and I wish I knew, like, if anyone has recommendations that's like that one, I really want one that's like as good as that one. Yeah. A book that deserves all the hype it gets. I am gonna go with the Once Upon a Broken Hearts duology. Oh no, not duology. I think it's gonna be a trilogy. They're so good, and I've been hearing more and more people talk about them. And they were like New York Times bestsellers or something. They are really that good, and I just love them so much. They definitely deserve all the hype. They're YA fantasy. They feel very magical, whimsical, like in The Cruel Prince. You get like a morally gray love interest. I feel like it reads so much better now that the second book is out, because the first book, I think I gave the first book like 4 stars because I was like, it feels like I was on the edge of something amazing, but then I like didn't quite like get to the, like, I didn't get to the end of what I felt like it should have been. And then I got this, like, this book came out, and I was like, okay, now it's like 5 stars. But it's like even more 5 stars than some of the 5 stars that I give. Like, it's like really good. A book that has my favorite characters. The Six of Crows duology has my favorite characters. I haven't read this in a while, but I remember like the characters were some of my favorites ever. One of the reasons why I like this duology so much was because the characters were so amazing in it. Like, I loved all of them for different things and in different ways, because they were all so different from each other, but then they were also like went so well together, and I just feel like this is a really cool found family. They all have their own POVs, and it's like they're all kind of the main characters of these books, so you really get to know all of them very deeply. A book that I wish I could live in. I wish I could live in the Caraval world, which is also Once Upon a Broken Heart world, and this is a hard one because there's so many worlds I'd want to live in. Caraval was so mind-boggling to read, but like the magic in it had such a unique, specific feeling to it that I would love to just fall asleep and wake up in this world. If you like that like magical, cool feeling when you're reading a book, Caraval is such a good one, and I liked it almost just as much as Once Upon a Broken Heart. Maybe just as much. Once Upon a Broken Heart, it depends on like how the third book is, but the romance in Once Upon a Broken Heart is better, I'd say, because it's just so good. But then like the book and the world in Caraval, like I just love the world of Caraval. It's so fun. And it also has good romance, but the world is just A book you thought you would hate, but you ended up loving it. I was forced to read this because of the blind book video where I like was unwrapping the books, and you know what? I ended up actually loving it, and I thought that like, it's not that I thought I would hate it, but I thought that I would be like so sad, because, which I was, but like, I just thought it was going to be a really tough read. I actually listened to the audiobook because sometimes when I'm a little bit less motivated to read, I'll just like listen to an audiobook. The audiobook was pretty good. I mean, I think it's probably, I feel like it maybe would have been better if I just read it, but I loved it and I thought it was an amazing book. It was really heartbreaking because of like all the reasons that I thought it was going to be heartbreaking. It really was. At the same time, it was just a really powerful and entertaining story, and I was really grabbed from the very beginning and just like couldn't stop listening to it. And yeah, I just loved it. To set the premise, by the way, this is not a spoiler, there is a girl who falls in love with a boy, and then they get married, and then he dies in a plane crash, and then she meets someone else and they fall in love and they get engaged. But then she gets a phone call and it's like, hello, this is your husband that you thought was dead and I'm actually alive. And now she has to like figure out what she's gonna do. Pretty intense setup for a story, which is partly why I was so scared to read it, but then I ended up loving it. A book that made you cry. I am not sure if any book has made me cry quite as hard as Darling Venom. Darling Venom felt like all the water was drained from my body with how much I was crying. Like, my face was just like puffy and my eyes were like hard to open. Like, it was intense. Not only that, but like for months after reading it, I would just get really sad and just sit there. The whole book was pretty intense and I was like crying throughout it, but really from the beginning part onward, I was a mess. That's not to say that every single part of the book was sad, because that's definitely not true. There were some cute parts, there were like some romantic parts, like it wasn't all sad. It really is like a book that I felt was really worth it in the end to read, but I also like so much pain. You know what the big thing is I didn't read the top because it literally says why I'd be crying right there at the top. But did I read it? No, I didn't read it. In my defense, I read it on Kindle, so I didn't see it. It's a Kindle Unlimited book, but I didn't read that part because I was just like, okay, this isn't a part of the actual tag, I don't think, but if it's not, I wanted to add on like a books that made me laugh or that were like funny. So I used a romance book and a fantasy book for this one. For romance, I'm doing The Worst Best Man because this book was super funny. It was one of those things where it's like enemies to lovers, but then like they're forced to work together and they just have these schemes against each other. It's like a good lighthearted book if you want to laugh to read. A wedding planner is about to get married to this guy who gets cold feet on the wedding the night before the wedding. He like texts his brother, who is his best man, and he's like, hey, everything you said last night is like makes so much sense to me now. Like, could you tell Lena, the one who's about to get married to him, that it's actually not going to work? And blah blah blah. So now the brother, who's also the best man, is like, okay, now I have to tell his was going to be wife, my was going to be sister-in-law, that he doesn't want to get married to her anymore. So he goes and he tells her, and then she gets like upset. He mentions that there was a text from his brother and she's like, could I see the text? She gets him to show her the text, and now she like kind of hates him because she's like, okay, you said something that made him not want to marry me. But fast forward years later and she has to work with him, the brother of her was going to be husband. The other book that made me laugh, it's fantasy, which, you know, this one also actually made me cry, this series, but I just really like all of Cassandra Clare's sarcasm in her books. If you find like sarcastic humor funny and you like those characters, I think you'll get a good laugh out of her books and the characters in them. I just like, whenever I'm reading her books, I'm just laughing a lot. I notice myself laughing a lot, and it's because of the way that she writes her characters, and they've got jokes. Like, it's so good. Okay, that is it for this book tag. I hope that you enjoyed watching it and that you maybe got some ideas for some books that you might want to read. All of the other places that I post about books in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.